Welcome to this Python programming. We are going to use examples from the mathematics syllabus that you should be studying this year. If you're confident with your maths, this is an advantage to reinforce your mathematics. If you're new and you haven't studied maths for a long time, this should support it. The very first example we're going to look at is how to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. There's the formula. How do we use the formula? We use the formula in a very, very simple way. Let's get a little diagram up. What we do is, give it a second just to get into focus. What we do is we pass in the Celsius, we calculate the Fahrenheit is 9/5 times the Celsius plus 32, and then we will output the Fahrenheit value. So that's our aim. There's step one, we need to grab input. There's step two, the process. And there's step three, the output. Okay, so let's turn that into code and how that code would work in Python. So we have a blank Python. We create a file. I've saved the file with a simple name. I've called it algebra ex1, algebra exercise. What's called algebra exercise. Save it somewhere safe so I can keep my file. And now let's write out what the code should look like. So we are going to have a function. We're going to define a function, and we're going to call it Celsius. Sorry, I'm just cheating a bit. We're going to call it Celsius to Fahrenheit. Okay, look at the spelling. You can call it C to T, but use a name that makes sense. Open close bracket, colon, hit enter. You have three steps. Step number one is get your input. Step number two is your process, your mathematical and your coding calculation. And step three is output. So let's put something under each of these. These hashes, just to reinforce, make notes inside your code. It's a way of helping you understand what you're writing. So let's get our input. Let's create a variable called Celsius, which is going to be assigned the result of an input statement. And the input is going to say Celsius. I'm going to keep it nice and short, use longer sentences. Now there's something missing from that line. And the thing that's missing from that line is that this input statement, if you remember from the videos in this week's lecture, will return a string. We need to turn it into either an integer or a float. So let's go back to our notes here. What type of data is this Celsius? Is it only going to be whole numbers, or are you going to have fractions? I think you're going to have fractions, and the type of data you need is a float. So we need to take the input and make sure that it works as a float. So let's wrap this statement in a conversion to a float. So we get the string and we convert it to a float by putting the word float at the front, open bracket. So this bit here and the end bracket wrap the input statement and convert it to a float. Of course, if you enter the letter A, it's going to crash your program. So that should give us our Celsius. Let's define a variable to store the result of the calculation, which will have assigned to it the result of the calculation. So we take our Celsius value and we multiply it by 9 divided by 5. Now, what you might have noticed is I've written this in a slightly different way. The formula says 9/5 times Celsius, but what you will discover is that if you write it in a different order, it will incorrectly calculate your work. So what I've done is I've put Celsius at the front, multiply by 9/5 plus 32. And let's output the result. Print, open close bracket, speech marks to say Fahrenheit, okay, space. After the speech mark before the bracket, put a comma in. Double click the name of your variable, which now stores the result, and paste it into there. Right, that in theory should work. We've got a lot of white space here, so let's just get rid of the white space in this program. Okay, and right click the name of the file, run file as script. It updates it, checks there's no obvious error. Double click the name of the function, paste it into the shell, open close bracket, and run it. So Celsius, if it's 10, let's have a look at what the let's get that out of the way. The examples are input 10, output 50. So let's go back to our Python. So we input 10, output 50. Let's run it again. And if we input 5, output should be 41. So let's type in 5, output is 41. Notice the 0.0, that's because we are dealing with floats. So write that program first, and we'll walk on to our second one.